It's no secret, I've been very hard on Rolex over the years since I've had this channel, and I have always been a fan of the brand, but I have never purchased a Rolex for many, many different reasons. I respect Rolex, I like their designs, I think they are very well made, they just aren't for me. So let's get into my list of Rolex alternatives that are cooler than Rolex. So when I say cooler than Rolex, this is really all subjective. I think that these watches are cooler than Rolex. You obviously may not think that. And if you disagree with me, please add a comment down below. But if you do agree with me, please tell me some other alternatives that you would suggest buying instead of a Rolex. So I'm going to start with my number one pick, and it's a watch that I own. It's the Vacheron Overseas. Now, many Vacheron Overseas sell on the secondary market, the versions 1, 2, or 3, and I have a version 3 that is the Overseas World Timer. They sell for around what Rolex sell on the secondary market. So if you were out there looking for a watch on the secondary market, let's say you wanted a GMT and you were about to spend about $18,000 on a watch, you can get a Vacheron Overseas. That's a watch from the Holy Trinity for a Rolex price. Yes, it may not be as recognizable as a Rolex, but in my opinion, any Vacheron is cooler than any Rolex. If you love the watches that I talk about here on my channel, you're really going to love the website that I'm about to tell you about. It's called Wrist Rebels. Wrist Rebels is a website that has all of those small micro brands and independent brands that are really hard to find all in one place. Brands like Sika Design, Mon, Formex, Awake, and Beau Blue, and many other brands you won't find anywhere else. Definitely check out Wrist Rebels at wristrebels.com. Also check out their Instagram at Wrist Rebels, and if you end up buying something, tell them that Watch Chris sent you. We're talking about aftermarket pricing. One of the best values, hands down, on the secondary market is the IWC Ingenieur. These are watches that sell for excellent prices when they are used or on the gray market and new. I'm not talking about the brand new versions. Those are a lot more expensive. Prior to them switching over to the round version, and now they have recently switched back to the Gerald Genta design. This is a classic Gerald Genta design. You have an integrated bracelet look, lots of different materials, great movement, and these are fantastic watches in my opinion. I have owned several of these over the years. Currently, I own a perpetual calendar Ingenieur that I absolutely love. The perpetual calendar that I own cost about the same amount as a Rolex GMT Master on the secondary market. However, you are getting a perpetual calendar chronograph with a flyback functionality and a digital date and digital month display. This is an insane watch for the price, and that's why I always recommend the Ingenieur for people who are looking for a bargain on the secondary market. But not only that, I do truly think it's a great alternative to any Rolex. The most affordable alternative on this list, and maybe not the best made if we're comparing it to Rolex. Obviously, this is not as well made as a Rolex, but it's still a really nicely made watch, especially for the price. I'm talking about the Zodiac Super Seawolf, or Seawolf. This was one of the original dive watches that came out in 1953, and obviously a very good looking watch. And these you can get for under $1,000 very easily. Most of these get standard movements inside, like STP, which is the Fossil Group movement, and Fossil Group does own Zodiac, so that is, I know, for a lot of people a sticking point. They use ETA movements as well and Sellita movements. They are great looking watches, and they are decently made as well, especially for the prices that you can get these watches for. At one point, they were selling for extreme discounts at places like TJ Maxx. I know that sounds crazy, but it still is a really good alternative to a Rolex. If you ever really wanted a Rolex and you couldn't afford one, these are actually affordable, and I think really good looking watches that are really cool. Another brand that I have dogged here on my channel many times is Panerai. However, I am first and foremost a fan of Panerai, and I still own a Panerai in my collection. I do love Panerai, and there are many reasons for that. One of those reasons is that they were one of the original dive watches as well. They have such an iconic design, and I really love their earlier models where they used ETA movements that were pretty standard. However, their quality was always really good. The fact that they used ETA movements meant that they were extremely serviceable, but they were workhorse watches that were meant for a purpose. They were purpose-built dive watches that just looked cool on your wrist. They're oversized for a purpose. They were the original oversized watch. I will always have a soft spot in my heart for Panerai, and I truly think they are one of the true alternatives to Rolex out there, and they are cool. When I see someone with a Panerai on their wrist, I say to myself, they know about watches. I don't always say that when I see someone with a Rolex on their wrist. Another affordable alternative to Rolex, I think, is the new Hydro Conquest from Longines. They have come out with some amazing watches over the past few years. They have constantly improved their designs, and the Hydro Conquest right now, I think, is at its pinnacle, and it is extremely affordable when compared to brands like Rolex and almost all the other brands that I'm talking about on this list, except for, of course, Zodiac. Coming in at around $2,400, brand new from Longines, and these are great looking watches with tons of functionality. 300 meters of water resistance, on the fly micro adjust, really nice bracelets, lots of new colors that they've come out with. I really love the Hydro Conquest, and I want to have one of these in my collection. I had one of their GMTs in my collection. I sold that, and that was kind of my Rolex alternative. I sold it, and I will buy another one back. I think I want another GMT, and I'm waiting for them to come out with a GMT in this new size. I definitely will get one. No video about Rolex alternatives could ever be complete if you don't talk about Tudor, the original affordable alternative to Rolex that was actually made by Rolex. When Tudor was born, its purpose was to be an affordable alternative to Rolex, using Rolex parts with the Tudor name and standard movements. So basically, you were getting the Rolex look without the Rolex price. And that is what Tudor are still here doing today. If you want a Black Bay is essentially an affordable alternative to a Submariner. It looks like a vintage Submariner, and that's because it is essentially an homage to the vintage Submariner. If you can't buy a Rolex, luckily there is an alternative that is a true alternative from Rolex, and that is the Black Bay, and maybe even the Pelagos. Two great alternatives to a Rolex, specifically the Submariner. The next watch is yet another watch that I've owned. It is the Cartier Santos. The Cartier Santos is an excellent alternative to Rolex, and I have said this many times. In fact, that's kind of the reason why I bought my Santos when I did. I ended up selling it for a lot of different reasons because I was funding another watch. However, I still think it's a very good alternative to a Rolex. It's extremely iconic. So if you're looking for something that's very iconic, very recognizable, Cartier, the Santos is an extremely recognizable watch. So if you want something that's recognizable, the Santos is the way to go. And Cartier right now has some cachet behind it where I think a lot of that hype that Rolex is getting directed towards Cartier as well. So that's kind of the reason why I did get rid of mine, because I feel like they are becoming somewhat of a hype watch, but at least they're still cool in my opinion. I still think that they are cool. These last three watches I think are really great alternatives to a Rolex, specifically a brand like Grand Seiko. Grand Seiko make a lot of watches that are heavily inspired by Rolex. Not a lot of people say that, but it is absolutely true. They use 3-link bracelets, they have dial designs and case layouts that are very similar to the Oyster case, and many brands out there have copied Rolex. Now, I'm not saying that Grand Seikos are copies of Rolexes, but the design here is very similar to Rolex. However, you are getting very creative dials from Grand Seiko, and the quality is extremely high. They are affordable and accessible, or more affordable than Rolex and more accessible than Rolex, I should say, and they offer some unparalleled technology when compared to brands like Rolex. Pricing is starting to catch up to Rolex, but at the same time, if you want to buy a Grand Seiko, there are plenty of them on the secondary market and they sell for heavy discounts. Omega, very similar to Tudor. I think they're a brand that you cannot ignore if you're talking about alternatives to Rolex. Omega make iconic watches. Two of their most iconic watches are the Seamaster, of course, a great alternative to the Submariner, and then the Speedmaster, an incredible alternative to the Daytona. These are two iconic historic watches that are really good looking, very well made, and come in so many different varieties, it is dizzying. Now, I don't think that's great about these watches. However, what I do think is great is their design and how iconic they are. If you want something that is really iconic, look to Omega. And again, on the secondary market, really great values. Last but not least, and one of the most historic dive watches of all times, is the Blancpain 50 Fathoms. If you're talking about alternatives to Rolex, specifically, again, the Submariner, you have to talk about the 50 Fathoms. There's an argument among historians of which watch came first, and the 50 Fathoms was an important watch that was used by historical figures like Jacques Cousteau, that was utilized by militaries around the world. It's an incredible, iconic watch that is part of history. I own a vintage 1950s 50 Fathoms. It's an aqualung that was sold directly to the public through the Aqualung stores, which was a store that was owned by Jacques Cousteau's family. Tell me what you guys think down in the comments below. Those are the watches that I have chosen for this list. Please let me know if you disagree with any of the watches that I mentioned in this video. Please let me know if there are any watches that you think I left off of this list down in the comment section below. I want to hear from you guys. I want to hear what you guys think. Tell me down in the comments below. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell icon. It's super helpful for the channel, and I very much appreciate it. Anyway, guys, thank you for logging on. Thank you for watching this video. I'll see you guys in the next video.